In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can build alphas that we can pull inside of ZBrush to make ornate details, such as some of the patterns and floral designs that you see on the top here. I'm just going to go ahead and rotate the camera. I'm going to hit Alt-S to hide everything else except for this part so I can kind of move around a little bit quicker. This scene is kind of dense and kind of heavy. So what we're going to look at is how we can actually make some of these kind of details that you see within here. And then I also made some details that kind of work in the back here. So all I did was open up a web browser and did a search for floral designs, and you're probably going to want to find something that's royalty free. And if you find something, you can copy the image. I'm going to go right click on here and say copy image. And then I'm going into Photoshop and then pasting that into Photoshop. Now the image that I found was a little bit low res, so I was able to go to image size and I was able to put this on percent and then put this to 200% and just basically double the size of this. I also went to blur and did a Gaussian blur on this, and there you're going to have some control over the blur amount on this. And then after I blurred it, then I went to filter and I did a sharpen and I did an unsharpen mask, and that gives you control to kind of sharpen things back up if you want. Now you've got a radius of the sharpen amount, and then you got an amount that you can kind of drive on there. So depending on like what you're looking for, I'm just trying to get rid of any kind of anti-aliasing that might be on there. And so if I up the radius, it's going to grab a little bit more samples for that, and if I do the amount, it's going to make it a bit harder edged on there. So let's go ahead and hit OK. The other thing you can do on some of your images, you can go up here to image and adjustment, and you can do threshold. That's going to turn any image that you have into just pure black and white, and you can run this slider to kind of try to find the range that you're looking for. I'm going to hit cancel on that. Now that does kind of make an image that's not very well anti-aliased, but it should work for you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of just take an element from this part of the image and I'm going to put it on the marquee tool. Now you can click and drag out like this if you want. Now if it's on fixed ratio, it's going to do a ratio. If you put it on normal, you can click and drag out and do a shape. Now if I hold down shift while I do this, it's going to make a square. So I do want to grab a square image, and I need to grab a little bit more of this, and I'm going to have to move this around just a little bit to kind of capture everything that I need. And I'll hit the left or right arrows to move this thing over to the left or to the right just a little bit. And now I can copy this. I'm going to hit Control C, make a new document, Control N, and then I'll hit create like this. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control V to paste this in there. Now I only want this part of the image, so I'll put it on the move tool. I'm just going to tap V, the hotkey for that. And I'll kind of move it into place. And then I want to paint with pure white for this image like this. So I just went ahead and clicked here, drag this in the upper left hand corner, and then I'm going to go ahead and use any of the brushes. Now I got a bunch of brush tool presets for this. You're probably going to have some brush tool presets too. I'm going to use this thing that's just a hard edged brush that's just like on or off, and I'm going to paint out any of these details that I don't want. So I'm going to paint this out right in through here. And then when I'm done with that, I'm going to go ahead and just save this thing out. So I'm going to hit Control E to merge down, just to merge this thing down here like this. Now what I've got inside of ZBrush is a white background with black. This, whatever's white is going to be high, and whatever's black is going to be low. So if you want to inverse that, you can hit Control I, or you can go to Image and do an adjustment, and you can invert just like that. So I'm going to save this out, and I'm going to save it as a Photoshop document. There's a few different file formats that you can save out that ZBrush can load up, but if you have a Photoshop file, that'll work rather well. So I'm going to just call this Floral Design 2, since this will be the second one that I've got, and I'll go ahead and hit save for that. And we can take a look at some differences between using an image that's black and white and an image that is, inverted like what we see here. Okay, so let's go back over to ZBrush, and I'm going to go ahead and put it on the standard brush. So if we tap B and then S and then find standard like this, I'm going to put on the stroke type of rectangle, and then here's the alpha that we have. If you want to import it in, you can go ahead and say import, and here's our floral design number 2. I'm going to load that in. And basically with this set up to be standard like this, if I click and drag out, you can see what that's going to give us for this. It's kind of cool how you can click and drag out and you can rotate this thing around. Now, if you tap U for the intensity, if you want to lessen that, you can do that. Now, one thing I did notice about this is that it's kind of doing this fading out on the outer edges of this, and this is going to use this for the standard brush. If you go and say use the layer brush, like what we see here, so if we do B and then L and then find the layer brush, we can put this on the stroke type of drag rectangle as well, and then we can also go and just do this floral design. Now with this one does a nice even pull out of the image. I did some alterations to this before, so I'm going to go over in alpha. Let me just show you what I did here. If we go to alpha and then click this and drag it over, you can see that there's a blur function on there, and then there's a mid value, and I have that set to 100. If I put that to 50, let's just try 50 and see what we get here. So if I click and drag out, we get something like this. Let's try the mid value value and do that at 100% and try that out. So that's not giving me what I'm looking for. Let's try a mid value of 0 and click and drag that out. You can see what that did. It kind of pushed we have all white and then all black, and then if I do our mid value at 0, then that means the mid area for something is like right at that 0 mark, so nothing can go lower than that. So that gives us some kind of base level, and then it builds up white on top of that, so we get something like this. And so we could sit there and drag out these details. I'm going to tap X and turn on symmetry, and you can see how we can build some really cool stuff going around, kind of like that. And maybe I'll do one more in through here like this. So we get a nice design going that way. So that's one way of doing it. You can see we've got a positive going, and if we hold down Alt, we can do a negative version. So if you remember in Photoshop, we inverted that so it's white and then the background's black. So with those settings, that's going to work like that. Now if we switch to a different alpha and we did this one here, we're going to get the opposite effect of what we're going for. If I hold down Alt and then click and drag out, you can see what we got. So we would have to change the mid value on this one to be pure white, and if I hold down Alt, then I can do a positive. Now that image on this one was pretty rough, so if I hold down Alt and I click and drag out, you can see what it's doing to this. There's not tons of resolution in the model. What I could do is up the blur amount on this. So if I put this up to 8, then click and drag out and hold down Alt while I do that, it's not going to be perfect, but it is going to give us a much smoother version. So if I even go and say blur, let's just do 15 and try that out, see what we get. And might want to turn on anti-aliasing alpha, so I'll do that and turn that on as well. So now I'm just going to, whenever this refreshes, I'm going to hold down Alt and then click and drag out. And you can see it does soften it up, but it's going to make it look a little bit better. And if we kind of zoom out just a little bit, we get a pretty nice look for it. So the other thing we can do with alphas is we can use this with masking. So I'm going to hold down Control, and you can see that I can choose a different stroke type of a rectangle. So I'm going to choose that, and I can put this on square and center. And I can choose the alpha that I'm looking for, and then in that case I hold down Control and I can just click and drag out, and I can make a shape like this. What I found is best is if I go to the side, maybe tap P to turn perspective off. If I want to fill this in a specific area, hold down Control and drag this out, and then add the spacebar modifier to it, and I can kind of push this thing around. At that point, it's going to project all the way through the model at that time. So we'll project all the way through, and let's say I want to turn that into some kind of relief. If I hit Control I, that will inverse the mask that you see here, or we can hold down Control and click in the open viewport, and that'll inverse this as well. So I've got on my interface, I can do a store morph target, and then if we go to deformation, we can do an inflate, but I've got this on my interface right here. If we went to this area, let's just go under tool and we go to deformation and you go to inflate, we could do it there. We could just, if we use your mouse and just click in there, I know a value of 1 is actually going to push us out a pretty good distance. And let's just say that's too much, right? We'll get rid of our mask that we've got here. You could go to the area for the morph target and you could take the value of that and you could take the slider and you could drop it back just a little bit, like back to 100. So like if you want to get this very fine kind of level, you can kind of dial that in with a number and kind of get that within there. So something like that. Now the other thing you can do is just hold down Control and you can drag out some of these details like this and build up a mask, and then you can hit Control I to inverse that. And if you wanted to use any of the masking tools, I can select back off of this thing here and put on drag rectangle. Let's just say I want to add masking in through here. I can just go ahead and add that to it just by adding the space bar. Do this here as well, and then maybe I want to make a very thin strip right in through here, and then hold down Alt while I do this, and that'll subtract that away for this thing like this. And I can make another shape like that and hold down Alt and just click and drag that out. So maybe we got something like this, and then we go back to if we do the same thing, we'll delete the morph target, store morph target. We'll do an inflate value of 1 like this, push it out, and then if I think those results are just too strong, then I can go to the morph value and then drag this back towards this 100% somewhere, and just say like a value of 70 or something like that. And if that's just too strong, again, try to find like this sweet spot for it somewhere within here. So that should give you enough options to kind of start playing around with using alphas and making some kind of ornate kind of detail on there. Now one last thing I could tell you about is if we go back to that layer brush, if we go to B and then L, and we do our stroke rectangle of this drag stroke like this, and then go back to our alpha and then maybe put it on this. And if we find a value, if we tap U and find a value that works really well for what we're trying to do on this, let's just go back to B and then L for the layer brush, and put this on this drag rectangle, put on the alpha, and find a strength for this. Tap U, and I'm going to go down to maybe 8 or 9, somewhere in there. If I click and drag this out, if that works rather well for me, and I know I can keep using this over and over again, and I want to save that as a brush, we could do that as well. So we can click and drag out for this, and we could say brush and say save as, and we can give it a name and save it somewhere where you want to save it. And if you want to load that up for another session, you go to brush and say load brush, and you can load that in. One last thing I could tell you about the layer brush: if you use this and you draw over the top of another part of the layer brush, it will add on top of itself, unless you do this thing with the morph target stuff. So you can see how that's building on top of itself. If you store a morph target before you start using the layer brush, it will recognize the depth and it'll never build up past that. So that becomes kind of a cool and interesting, powerful way to kind of build up details on here to where you never kind of overlap things. And you can see you can kind of keep building up like that. So I think that's going to give you enough information so you can start playing around with using some alphas and finding some maybe floral designs that work for you, and then building up some of that ornate detail and kind of building up some of these cooler kind of patterns that you see within here.